All right, he said it. He actually looked into a camera and said it out loud. The pen isn't dry. And the craziest part of this entire story is not that Drake said it. It's what the entire internet said back. Because it wasn't fear. It wasn't respect. It wasn't the panic a warning like that used to cause. No, the response was a single word that nobody in the history of hip-hop has ever dared to attach to the biggest artist on the planet. Objection. We'll get there. But before we unpack all of it, the live stream, the warning, Rick Ross, and the numbers that made this whole thing possible, the Jay-Z whispers, and the court documents that turned a tough guy moment into the joke of the year, I need you to do one thing for me. Every like on this video is one more page of that lawsuit we are going to read together before this is over. And I promise you, when you hear what Drake's own lawyers told a judge and you put it next to what Drake just told a camera, you are going to understand why the timeline spent 48 hours crying laughing instead of being scared. Now, let me be fair before I'm anything else, because there is good news in all of this. The good news is that Drake is entertaining again. Genuinely. He's outside, he's energized, he's laughing, he's showing off double chrome bracelets and a Cartier that your grandmother would wear, his words, not mine, diamond crosses on the jeans, joking that he's talked to every jeweler in Miami with the fake stones. And for the first time in a long time, he sounds like a man having fun instead of a man drafting a witness statement. That's real. Credit where it's due. But then there's the other part. The part where Drake, maybe 90 seconds into sounding human again, leaned toward the microphone and said this. I appreciate the last few months. It's been incredible for me. I dropped 3 on that head up. These guys are dropping albums. It's like hello and goodbye. You know what I'm saying? And careful with that reply, 'cause the pen isn't dry. I'm just letting you know. That's what I'm on. 5 words. The pen isn't dry. In 2026. After everything. And just like that, a victory lap turned into a referendum. Because here's what that sentence was supposed to do. It was supposed to remind the rap game that Drake is still dangerous. That 3 albums in one night was just the warm-up. That any rapper thinking about responding to Iceman should think twice, maybe 3 times, maybe check with counsel first. That's the movie playing in his head. The movie playing on everyone's phone was very different. And to understand why, you have to understand who the warning landed on first, because the answer is a man whose last 2 weeks have been so rough that his own fan base started doing public math to defend him. A man named William Roberts. Ricky Rosie. The biggest boss. Rick Ross. Let's start with the reaction, because the reaction is the story. When Drake said careful with that reply, 'cause the pen isn't dry, the intended effect was intimidation. The actual effect was a courtroom joke that spread faster than any record he's dropped this year. Within hours, the quotes and replies looked like a legal drama. The pen isn't dry, but the paperwork is. Objection, Your Honor. The pen is hearsay. Rock Nation's subpoena department just cleared its schedule. GG's, somebody check whether the pen has retained counsel. I'm not even exaggerating. The single most liked response I saw was 4 words long. Discovery will be fun. Now ask yourself why. Why does a loaded pen warning from Drake, the same man who 2.5 years ago could make rappers reconsider their release dates with a single caption, land as comedy in 2026? Because context is everything, and the context changed. Back then, that sentence carried the full weight of an untouched aura. You heard the pen isn't dry, and you pictured somebody's career getting zipped up in a body bag. You imagined panic. Moving the family. Deleting the discography. Today, you hear it, and the first thing the culture reaches for isn't fear. It's a receipt. It's a court filing. It's the memory of a battle that ended with the other guy performing the victory song on the biggest stage in American sports, while an entire stadium sang the part that wound up in a lawsuit. That's the mountain this warning has to climb now. Fair or not, that's the terrain. And this is where I have to ask the question everybody dancing around this story keeps avoiding. Is there a single person inside Drake's camp who is allowed to say no to him? Anybody? Because from the outside, moments like this are exactly why the yes men conversation refuses to die. Somebody in that room watched him load up the tough talk, watched the lawsuit receipts still floating around the timeline, watched the mood of the culture and said nothing? Not one voice saying, "Hey, maybe the intimidation lane is closed for renovation. Let's just be funny this time." Because that's the part that should genuinely frustrate even his most loyal fans. Drake didn't need the warning. The joke was already winning. These guys are dropping albums. It's like hello and goodbye. That's a great line. It's petty, it's clever, it's quotable. It's everything you want from a victory lap. Clown the flops, flex the bracelets, fly private while your ops compare economy legroom, and walk away. That's the move. The commercial resume does the intimidating for you. But the second you escalate from joking to warning, you change what people reach for. Jokes get quoted. Warnings get cross-examined. And the culture is not the only place the temperature changed. There's a clip floating around that I think about more than any chart number. Somebody sat their mother down, a woman who clearly does not follow any of this, and asked her what she thinks about Drake. And this woman, no Stan account, no agenda, no label in her ear, said, and I'm condensing here, I don't like his voice. I don't like what he talks about. I don't like the way he walks. Then she caught herself and said, let me just stop right there. Now that's funny, obviously. But it's also a weather report. When the man at the top of rap has reached the point where somebody's mom feels perfectly comfortable announcing she doesn't like the way he walks, the aura is not what it was. The permission structure changed. And warnings only work when the aura is intact. And to the Drake fans already typing, relax, we're going to get to the numbers, and some of them are very good for your side. But you have to sit in this part first, because this is the part your favorite channels will never play for you. Now let's talk about the man standing in the blast radius of all this, because Rick Ross didn't just catch a stray from that live stream. He caught the whole clip. Understand the setup. For weeks, Ross has been on a press run defending his new album, Set in Stone, and fighting a narrative that formed before the music even had a chance to breathe. The reported first-week number, around 20,000 units, hit the timeline like a starting pistol. Second week, roughly the same neighborhood. And in an era where the scoreboard updates in real time, that number became the whole conversation. Ross, to his credit, did not hide from it. He got on camera and told everybody he's playing the long game. He pulled his own streaming report, 63.5 million streams across the first 2 weeks, which his camp equates to about 42.5k album units before physicals, and argued that 22,000 the first week and 20 the second isn't a fall-off, it's consistency. He even floated a theory that's been making the rounds, that the drastic second-week collapses you see from other artists are what inflated numbers look like, and that in 2026, the new flex is no bots. Now here's where I have to be honest with you, even if it stings. I like Ross. Ross has been one of my favorite rappers for a long time, and the catalog is the catalog. But the long game defense has a problem, and the problem is arithmetic. If 63.5 million streams is the 2-week total, that works out to a fraction of what the big releases do in a single day. And when Ebro, not a Drake stan, not an op, a guy who has defended Ross plenty, got asked whether the algorithm might actually be working against Rick Ross because of all the Drake talk, the room didn't laugh it off. The room went quiet, and then half the room nodded. Think about that. The conversation around an album from one of the most established brands in rap has degraded into whether the platforms themselves have decided he's clickbait for somebody else's story. And look, Ross isn't wrong that inflation is real. We talk about it on this channel all the time. But there's a rule in rap beef that nobody writes down and everybody knows. The moment you start explaining your numbers, you've already lost the numbers argument. Nobody with a smash has ever had to explain the math. The math explains itself. Then the vultures arrived, right on schedule. 50 Cent, who has been beefing with Ross since some of y'all were in elementary school, saw the reports and publicly laughed, joking that Ross moved 2,000 copies. 2,000. The reported real figure is closer to 17 to 22,000 depending on who you ask, which is still the lowest opening of Ross's career by a mile, but accuracy has never been the point with 50 Cent. The point is ammunition. Ross now has 2 giant rivalries running at the same time, Drake on one side and 50 Cent on the other, and every sales update hands both fan bases fresh bullets. And when you're feeding 2 wars at once, Your album stops being an album. It becomes a prop in two other people's stories. Then came the tour reports, and this is where it went from funny to genuinely uncomfortable. Screenshots started circulating of Ross's Miami show, his home city, with seat maps glowing green, entire sections unpurchased. Then came the kicker. Buy one, get one 50% off. In Miami. For the biggest boss. Now, touring is complicated. Plenty of legends discount tickets, I get it. But optics don't care about context. And the optics of a 2-for-1 homecoming while your rival streams himself laughing in double chrome bracelets are brutal. And the wildest part? The industry might have seen it coming. There's a theory going around, allegedly, let me say that clearly, allegedly, that DJ Khaled, who is extremely close to Jay-Z's camp, got the memo early that this was Iceman's season and quietly pushed his own project back. Nobody wanted to be standing next to the 3-album avalanche when it dropped. Nobody except Ross, who walked directly into the storm, dissed the man at the center of it, called Iceman horrendous, called the streams fake, and then watched his own numbers become the punchline to a joke he helped write. There's a brutal piece of fan math going around that explains the whole trap. Something like 70% of the rap audience overlaps with Drake fandom in some way. So when you go to war with Drake, you are, by definition, going to war with a huge chunk of your own potential customers. Ross's answer on stage was to have his DJ run the classics minus the Drake vocals, literally stripping the biggest feature artist of a generation out of the records, Live, and letting the crowd fill in the gaps. Iconic pettiness. Legendary, even. But you can't strip the Drake vocals out of the algorithm. That's the part nobody can figure out. Meanwhile, the man himself was in Monaco, celebrating 20 years since his debut album, team around him, bottles up, telling the camera this hustle is real. And I mean this sincerely, that longevity deserves respect. 20 years in this game is not nothing. But you could hear the sadness underneath it, because everyone watching knew the celebration was happening one ocean away from the discourse. He was toasting the legacy while the timeline read the receipts. Now, to understand why that question matters so much, you have to zoom out and look at the machine all of this is happening inside of, because what Rick Ross is actually fighting isn't Drake. It's the algorithm. And that is a fight no rapper has ever won. Here's what most people outside the music business still don't fully grasp about 2026. The streaming platforms and the social platforms are not neutral. They are not scoreboards. They are attention engines, and attention engines have one job: find what people are already engaging with and feed them more of it until they leave. That's it. That's the whole business model. Which means the moment the internet decided that Rick Ross content is really Drake content, the moment the highest engagement Ross clip of the year was him talking about Iceman instead of Set in Stone, the algorithm learned a lesson. And the lesson was this: Ross is a subplot. Think about how dark that is. The man did a whole press run, sat in every chair, answered every question, and the clips that traveled were never the music. They were the mentions. The platforms looked at the data and concluded that what the audience wants from Rick Ross is not Rick Ross songs, it's Rick Ross talking about Drake. And once an attention engine learns that, it doesn't unlearn it, because it has no memory for context and no loyalty to legacy. It just optimizes. So Ross drops an album, and the recommendation system that could have put it in front of millions is instead busy serving those millions a clip of him calling somebody else's album mid. That's what Ebro was circling in that conversation everybody clipped. When he said the algorithm might be working against Ross because of the Drake talk, people heard a hot take. What he was actually describing was a mechanism. Controversy is jet fuel for distribution, but only the controversy's subject gets the thrust. Ross made himself the subject of Drake's controversy, not his own. He built a bonfire and then stood next to it wondering why nobody could see him through the smoke. And the really brutal part is that the numbers everybody clowned him for, the 20,000 first week, the 20,000 second week, might be the most honest numbers in rap right now. No bundle games. No bot spike that craters 60% in week 2. Just a real, flat, human floor. And in a sane world, that would be respected. A 20-year veteran with a loyal base moving consistent units with zero gimmicks is a legitimate business. But the algorithm doesn't reward honest floors. It rewards violent spikes. And the only way to get a violent spike in 2026 is either to be Drake or to be talking about Drake. Ross chose the second door, and it led to a room where his album was the wallpaper. This is the part where the whole situation stops being funny to me, honestly, because what happened to Ross can happen to anyone standing in that man's shadow. It's the new physics of the game. You don't have to lose a battle to lose your momentum anymore. You just have to become searchable as somebody else's opponent. The machine does the rest. Ross didn't flop, exactly. He got metabolized. There's a difference. A flop is when people hear it and don't care. Metabolization is when the culture never gets the chance to decide because the culture is too busy watching the fight. And here's the kicker that should terrify every veteran rapper watching this. Ross is one of the most connected men in the industry. Label infrastructure, radio relationships, festival slots, a car show, a wing empire, a book. He did everything right by the old playbook. And the old playbook lost to a live stream. That's the era we're in now. The rollout is dead. The moment is king. And Drake, whatever else you want to say about him, is the greatest manufacturer of moments the genre has ever seen. So when you watch that stream and you hear the hello and goodbye line, understand what you're really hearing. You're not hearing a rapper clown a flop. You're hearing the king of the moment economy laughing at a man who brought a rollout to a moment fight. It was never fair. It was never going to be fair. And everybody in the industry who watched Ross walk into that and said nothing, they weren't being quiet. They were taking notes on what not to do. Which is why, allegedly, Khaled pushed his album. Which is why, allegedly, the whole Rock Nation calendar suddenly got very quiet this year. Nobody wanted to be the next control group in the experiment Ross just ran on himself. And that silence, that industry-wide flinch, is the most honest review set in stone ever got. Not the numbers. Not the jokes. The silence of every other artist looking at that 2-week chart and quietly moving their release date. But the algorithm story has one more layer, and it's the one that turns this from a Ross problem into a Drake problem. Because the same machine that metabolized Ross is the machine Drake thinks he owns. And he does own it right now, today. But attention engines are not loyal. They don't love anyone. They optimize for whoever is generating heat this quarter. And the day the heat moves, and in this game the heat always eventually moves, the same feed that pumps Iceman to everyone will pump the post-mortem of Drake's next flop to everyone with the same cold indifference. The machine has no favorites. It only is weather. And the weatherman always thinks he's the climate right up until the storm he's standing in changes direction. Keep that in your back pocket. It's going to matter in about 4 minutes. Now, let's go back to that live stream for a second, because there's a structural problem at the heart of it that nobody wants to name, and it's bigger than one bad line. It's the yes men problem. And I want to be precise here, because this gets misdiagnosed constantly. When people say Drake is surrounded by yes men, they usually mean it as a joke, like there's a room full of sycophants clapping at everything he says. That's not it. That's never how it works at that level. The real yes men problem at the top of the music industry isn't a room full of people saying yes. It's a room full of people who have quietly calculated that the cost of saying no is higher than the cost of watching him walk into a wall. It's not flattery. It's risk management. Everybody in that room has a job, a retainer, a percentage, a proximity to power they don't want to lose, and every single one of them has watched what happens to people who got on the wrong side of a mood. So the room doesn't clap. The room just goes professionally silent at exactly the moment a real friend would have spoken. And the live stream was the loudest silence of the year. Think about what had to not happen for that pen line to reach the public. Somebody had to not say, hey, the lawsuit is still a meme, maybe don't do the loaded pen thing. Somebody had to not say, the bracelet bit is killing, let's stay in the funny lane. Somebody had to not say, Ross is already buried by his own numbers, the warning makes you look like you're kicking a guy who's down, and the internet hates that. All of those are obvious, basic, first-read observations. Any halfway competent strategist sees them in real time. The fact that none of them landed tells you one of two things, and neither is good. Either nobody in the room saw it, which means the room isn't very good. Or somebody saw it and decided it wasn't worth their access to say it, which means the room has already made peace with the walls. And here's why that matters beyond one stream. Great careers are not killed by enemies. They're killed by the absence of editors. Every legendary run in this genre had a voice in the room with veto power. Jay had them. Kendrick has them. Even Ross, for all his current troubles, built his peak with people who would tell him when a record wasn't it. The single most dangerous asset a superstar can lose is not the fan base. Fan bases are loyal to a fault. It's the internal no. The internal no is what keeps the tough guy talk in the vault on the weeks when the public context has shifted and nobody on the inside noticed, because everybody on the inside is paid not to notice. The situational awareness failure is the real headline. 2.5 years ago, before the battle, before the lawsuit, the pen isn't dry would have landed exactly as intended because the aura was load-bearing. Warnings from Drake carried weight because there was a decade of receipts behind them and 0 public losses. But auras are not permanent. They are a currency, and currencies inflate and deflate based on events the holder doesn't control. The culture repriced Drake's aura the moment the receipts from the courtroom started circulating, and the price it settled on does not support intimidation as a product anymore. It supports comedy. It supports flexing. It supports petty. It does not support menace. A man whose legal team filed emotional distress language cannot also be the boogeyman. The market cleared that trade already. The only person who doesn't seem to have gotten the memo is the man holding the pen. And look, I can already hear the counterargument because it's a fair one. The counterargument is that Drake doesn't care how the warning lands, that he's so far past needing the culture's permission that the mockery is just more engagement, and all engagement is good engagement. There's some truth to that. The stream did numbers. The clips traveled. By the cold math of the attention economy, even the laughing at him was a win, because it was still about him. I concede that. But there's a difference between being the main character and being the main character in a story where you're the joke. Attention is not neutral when it's attached to a narrative, and the narrative being attached to Drake right now is not tough guy. It's guy who doesn't realize the room is laughing. That's a much harder narrative to shake than a flop. Flops are forgotten. Becoming the punchline to your own warning is forever. The tragedy, and I mean that sincerely, is that the fix was free. All he had to do was stay in the bracelet lane. The double chrome, Grandma Cartier, Miami jeweler material was the best content he'd made in years. Loose, funny, self-aware, rich. If the entire stream had been that, the story this week is Drake is back and hilarious, and everyone is quoting the Cartier line. Instead, the story is the pen. One sentence. That's all it takes to turn a victory lap into a referendum. One sentence, nobody in the room stopped. And the reason nobody stopped it is the same reason the joke landed so hard in the first place. When you've been the most powerful man in the genre for a decade, everyone around you eventually starts confusing your impulses with strategy. He wanted to say the pen thing, so the pen thing must be smart. That's not strategy. That's just power with no friction. And power with no friction doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you the last person to find out when the room has turned. Which, judging by the comment sections, the quote tweets, and the 50,000 likes on a legal pun, is exactly what happened. Somebody in that camp needed to say the pen is dry on that one, champ. Nobody did. And now we all know it, but hold on. Because if the story ended with Drake clowning Rick Ross, this would be a funny live stream and nothing more. It doesn't end there. It goes somewhere much bigger, and it's the part of that stream that half the commentary channels covering the story somehow whispered past. The Jay-Z of it all. See, buried inside that same live stream, viewers caught what they believe was a slick shot aimed not at Ross, but at Sean Carter himself. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was definitely a Jay-Z line, because I wasn't in the room and neither were you, and if there's one thing I refuse to do on this channel, it's sell you fan fiction as reporting. But I will tell you this. The people who study Drake's pen for a living, and there are thousands of them, immediately started pulling receipts. Old lyrics. Old interviews. The Rock Nation lawsuit. The pattern of subliminals that stretches back years. And when that community moves in one direction at once, it's rarely by accident. And here's the fascinating part. Drake's camp doesn't seem interested in killing the speculation. If anything, the energy coming from that side is the opposite. It's testing, poking, leaving the bait in the water to see if anything with teeth swims up to it. And when you understand who Jay-Z is in this story, you understand why that's such a dangerous game. This is not some streamer with a podcast. This is the man who wrote Takeover. The man whose entire mythology is built on patience, on winning wars so cold and slow the other guy doesn't know he's lost until it's already history. Jay-Z doesn't do back and forth. Jay-Z does endings. And that brings us to what might be the most revealing comment in this entire saga, and it didn't come from Drake or Ross or Jay. It came from the middle. From the people who know both camps. And what they said, almost in unison, was this. Publicly, there is no back and forth between Jay and Drake. Privately, different conversation. And then the key line, the one that should be pinned to the top of every discussion about this. If Jay-Z and Drake had a real issue, you wouldn't have to dissect bars and guess. It would be direct. It would be blatant. Two of the best ever would know exactly how to aim at each other. Read that again. The only thing keeping this from being an all-out war is that Jay hasn't decided it's worth aiming yet. That's not peace. That's a held breath. And Drake knows it. Of course he knows it. Which is why the shots stay just subliminal enough to deny. It's the oldest move in his playbook. Get close enough to the line to make the other side feel it. Stay far enough back to call it paranoia when they respond. He did it for years with Kendrick before Kendrick finally stopped doing subliminals and just started writing names. And look how that ended. Which raises the question nobody on Drake's side seems to want to ask out loud. Why would you run that same play against Jay-Z? Because the last time Drake poked a giant with subliminals, the giant didn't subliminal him back. The giant made the whole world sing about him at the Super Bowl. And now, with the pen is dry warning still echoing, Drake is flirting with the one man in the industry who has more lawyers, more leverage, more patience, and more institutional power than anyone he's ever tested. The man whose company he is, and I cannot stress this enough, currently entangled within actual litigation. You cannot write comedy this clean. The pen isn't dry, aimed vaguely at the building housing the legal department he's suing. Now, to be fair to Drake, because this channel will always be fair, there's a version of this where he's simply having fun and the internet is doing what the internet does. Maybe. But when you've spent years cultivating the most paranoid, detail-obsessed fan base in music, you don't get to be surprised when they notice the details. That paranoia is the product. He built the magnifying glass. He doesn't get to complain that people are holding it up to him, and this is the part of the story where it stops being about rap at all. Because the reason the pen isn't dry-landed as a joke instead of a threat isn't really about the battle, or the numbers, or even Jay-Z. It's about a document. A public document. Filed by Drake's own legal team. In his own lawsuit. And once you've read it, you can never unhear the way he talks on live streams. I want you to listen to this language and remember, this isn't a blogger. This isn't a hater. This is what Drake's attorneys told a court of law happened to him, in his name, with his signature on the strategy. As a direct result of the defendant's conduct, Drake suffered, and I'm paraphrasing the filing here, impairment of reputation and standing in his community and profession, personal humiliation, mental anguish and suffering, emotional distress, stress, anxiety, lost earnings, and other financial loss. Personal humiliation, mental anguish, emotional distress. Now, put that document on one side of the scale. And on the other side, put a man on a live stream, jingling 2 chrome bracelets, telling the whole rap game to be careful how they reply because the pen is still wet. Those 2 versions of Drake cannot exist at the same time. One of them has to give. And that's the trap, the real trap, the one none of the yes-men apparently warned him about. You cannot spend a year telling the legal system that words caused you humiliation and anguish, and then turn around and tell the culture that your words should still terrify people. The culture reads. The culture screenshots. The culture has a memory like a court stenographer. Every tough line he says from now until forever gets held up next to that filing, and the comparison will never, ever favor him. He didn't lose that protection in the battle. He signed it away in the lawsuit. And this is what I mean when I say the warning was the mistake, not the joke. If Drake wants to be the funny, rich, untouchable villain of rap, the guy with the Grandma Cartier laughing at flops, That lane is wide open and honestly, he's great in it. But the intimidating boogeyman lane? That lane closed the day his lawyers filed a document describing his emotional distress. Not because he's not talented. Not because he can't rap. But because intimidation requires mystique, and you cannot have mystique and a paper trail of hurt feelings at the same time. Pick one. The game has already picked for him. And here's the thing that should actually worry Drake's side the most. The jokes about lawyers and paperwork aren't coming from Kendrick fans anymore. They're coming from neutral fans. From hip-hop media. From people who spent a decade defending him. When Ebro's room is quietly nodding about algorithms, and even the blogs that used to carry water are giggling at the tough talk, the center has moved. The battle for the core was lost a while ago. The lawsuit cost him the middle. Now, does any of this mean Drake is finished? Don't be ridiculous. The man just dropped 3 albums in one night, and the numbers, even the skeptics admit, are enormous. He's commercially bulletproof in a way almost no artist in history has been. But commercial power and cultural power are 2 different currencies, and what we're watching in real time is the exchange rate collapse between them. He can sell more than everyone and scare no one. That's a strange place for the self-proclaimed big bad of rap to live. Which is why the Ross feud matters more than it looks. Ross is the perfect opponent for 2026 Drake. He's vulnerable, he's proud, he refuses to stop talking, and he keeps handing Drake easy content. Every set in stone headline, every discount ticket screenshot, every long game explanation is a gift. Drake doesn't need a diss track for this fight. Ross is losing this fight to arithmetic. All Drake has to do is laugh on stream and let the scoreboard talk. And maybe that's the real meaning of the pen isn't dry. Maybe it was never about bars at all. Maybe the pen writes checks, writes captions, writes jokes at other people's expense. Maybe the only thing that pen is dry of is mercy for the easy targets. But there's one target left. The big one. The one he's been circling for years without ever naming. And that's where the story ends, because that's where the next story begins, and understand the deeper economics of why everyone picked a side so fast. Beef in 2026 is not really about music. It is a content industry. Every blogger, every clip channel, every reaction streamer eats when the big names swing at each other, which means the entire ecosystem profits from keeping the tension alive whether the artists want it or not. Ross disses Drake, that's a week of content. Drake jokes back, that's another week. The blogs are not covering the beef. The blogs are farming it. And both rappers know it, which is why neither of them will ever truly let it die. The beef is the rollout now. The albums are just the excuse. That is the part nobody says out loud. The tension is the product. And everybody in this story, from the streamers to the legends to the algorithm, is getting paid off the friction. Everybody except the music.so, where does that leave us? It leaves us with a live stream that was supposed to be a victory lap and instead became a status report on the whole post-battle era. Drake, funny again, rich as ever, commercially untouchable, and somehow less feared than at any point in his career, telling the game his pen is loaded while the game replies with legal jokes. Rick Ross, 20 years into a legendary career, defending his math in Monaco while his Miami seats go 2-for-1 and 50-cent laughs from the front row of a beef that's old enough to vote. Jay-Z, silent, somewhere above it all, the only man in the story who hasn't said a word and the only one whose response everybody actually fears. And the wildest detail of all? The people around Drake seem to know it. Remember that line from earlier? If Jay and Drake had a real problem, it would be direct, blatant, unmistakable. That's not just analysis. That's a dare. The whole industry is essentially standing around waiting to see if Drake will ever stop doing subliminals and actually say the name. And based on how the last name he said worked out, my guess is those subliminals stay subliminal for a long, long time. The pen isn't dry. He said it. He meant it. And the internet's answer was a courtroom objection that 50,000 people liked. That's 2026 rap in one sentence. The most successful artist alive warning a game that no longer flinches. But now I want to hear from you, because this one has layers and I know this comment section is going to be a war zone. First question. Was Drake's pen is dry line a real warning that rappers should genuinely worry about? Or was it, as the timeline decided, the single corniest thing he's said since the lawsuit got filed? Be honest. Even if you're a fan. Especially if you're a fan. Second question. Rick Ross. Is the set-in-stone situation a real flop that ends the Biggest Boss mythology, or is the long game? Nobot's defense actually valid and we just can't see it yet? Because 20,000 first week with no Drake feature is either a humiliation or the most honest rollout in rap right now, and I genuinely can't tell which one you all believe. Third question, and this is the big one. Jay-Z. If Drake keeps leaving these crumbs, does HOV ever respond, or is silence itself the response? Because there's a real argument that ignoring the biggest artist on earth is the most disrespectful thing Jay could possibly do. And an equally real argument that the day Jay-Z actually answers is the day Drake finally gets what he's been asking for since 2018. Drop your take below. All three answers. And if you're one of the Drake fans who made it all the way to the end of this video, I respect you, genuinely, and your comment better be typed in all caps with citations. If you enjoyed this one, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hype it up while you're at it, because we do this every single week and the algorithm, unlike Ross's tour, does not offer discounts. Share this with one person who's been following this whole saga, because the group chat needs to see it. And before you go, if you think this story is wild, wait until you hear what Kevin Durant allegedly told Nike about Drake's next move, because that video is on your screen right now and trust me, you are not ready for what's in those messages. The pen isn't dry. But neither is the ink on that court filing. I'll catch you in the next one.